food comes last. Alice from Oregon. I thought pantries were for less fortunate people, but anybody could be less fortunate in a day or even a second. Claire from Virginia. The Feeding America network of food banks helps provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. No one should have to worry where their next meal will come from. Together, we can end hunger. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
VTRN Sports, powered by ESPN Radio. The games play here. NFL action this week kicks off on Thursday as the Raiders take on the Broncos at 8 p.m. after Tech Talk Live. Then Sunday, 4 big games. Falcons at Colts in Munich. Then Patriots at Bucks, Rams at 49ers, and Steelers at Chargers on Sunday Night Football. Plus, don't forget Monday, we'll have Eagles at Packers. Catch the NFL on VTRN Sports, powered by ESPN Radio, 93.3 FM, 1320 AM, the VTRN Sports app, and on your smart speaker, open VTRN Sports.
You're stepping into the fast lane on the VTRN Sports app, 93.3 FM and 1320 AM Lynchburg, or by asking Alexa or Google Home, open VTRN Sports Lynchburg. Now, take the fast lane through the topics that matter across the Commonwealth. This is the Fast Lane with Ed Lane.
No, we're not advocating for it. No, we're not even saying it's close to being a realistic scenario. But every time something pops up, whether Liberty University has a rough patch in football or something transpires with Hugh Freeze, obviously the most latest example is being fired at Auburn this past Sunday, inevitably there is a faction of people, there are people, in the greater area, the greater sphere of Liberty University, if you will, where automatically it becomes that discussion of, would you take Hugh Freeze back if you're Liberty University? First of all, again, I am not of the belief they are even remotely close to being in a spot where they need to get rid of Jamie Chadwell. And even if that time arrives, I am not remotely 100% of the belief. I think you can make a compelling case that Hugh Freeze could still win at Liberty. But you also need to be aware that there are plenty of shortcomings that you knew about before he got to Liberty, and many of them have since crept up in his demise at Auburn. And that's the reality of this situation and why it's worth addressing it today here in the Fast Lane, because every time there's a coaching change in college athletics, particularly in the SEC, where so much of the job is about so many factors, being somebody that has great attention to detail. You could debate that on Hugh Freeze. Somebody that is great at connecting with his people. Hugh Freeze actually very good at that, especially knowing who the power brokers are and how to connect with them. Maybe to a fault in terms of his networking strategies, golf, but it's the reality of it. Unlike Brian Kelly, who at LSU, you get the classic, he doesn't even know the players' names type headline that comes out when he leaves. Oftentimes, the dirty laundry gets aired when someone is on their way out or when they have been ousted from a scenario, except North Carolina, where it just comes out right off the bat. Talk about not knowing how to work the media and the fans. That's the biggest example ever. You don't have to be adversarial, but whether they want to create that environment or just can't help themselves, again, friend of ours, Michael Lombardi, but he and Belichick, they could potentially have handled this a lot differently. I think as much of that goes to Belichick and what he wants out of an organization, and then Lombardi, very much a willing accomplice in that regard. We're not talking accomplice in like shooting sense. We're talking accomplice in running a football organization in a way that fans may not want it. But those are realities that pop up. So when you get something like this that's popped up where Hugh Freeze gets dismissed from Auburn, there's inevitably a faction of people around Liberty Athletics. I'm not talking about administrators. I haven't heard it at all from them. They're either A, even remotely entertaining, or even remotely close to the idea of drastic changes in leadership. That's the new phrase that pays, if you will, in college athletics. But it doesn't mean that there aren't a faction of people that believe that, and equally a faction of people who go, oh, absolutely not. There's no way that they would want Hugh Freeze back at Liberty. So it's worth addressing. It's worth at least putting that out there and then admitting the fact that when it comes to whether you would even entertain that hypothetical scenario, you do get to look back at Hugh Freeze's demise at Auburn and sit there and go, frankly, we could have seen some of this coming from his behavior at Liberty University. It's just Liberty is not the complexity of a job that LU is not LSU, as we like to say, in terms of the complexity of its job, or Liberty is not Auburn in terms of the complexity. So, wanted to get that out there. We will have more on this later this week in the Fast Lane because you have chimed in. It does not take much to get people going. There was the old joke, by the way, when I was in Martinsville, Virginia, where people used to say, if you're in a slow news cycle, just say Duke period, UNC period, and then just tweet it out and let people go off and put it on Facebook. It's kind of that way when it comes. Hugh Freeze period, Liberty period, go, exclamation point. And people will just immediately put that out there. So that is the reality of that name as it gets brought up. But it was worth addressing today in the Fast Lane. Please keep your feedback coming. We need more time for it because we have a shorter edition of the show today because college basketball is already back and we have Virginia Tech Lady Hokies basketball, their season opener tonight at 5:30 p.m. airtime right here on the VTRN Sports app and Asset Smart Speaker, Open VTRN Sports. But we also did a Trostfall.com fast take on this earlier today. When it comes to the overarching world of sports, much like Hugh Freeze's end at Liberty was not a storybook ending, and even less so, his end at Auburn was less of a storybook ending. When it comes to what fans envisioned, wanted, and then the reality of how it manifested itself. The truth of the matter is, storybook endings don't happen as often as you would like in sports. And on the one hand, it stinks when that doesn't happen. Like, I wouldn't call them totally plucky because they have like the 6th largest payroll in baseball, even though it's, like everyone, drastically behind the LA Dodgers, with the exception of the Mets. But the Blue Jays are a higher payroll team relative to Major League Baseball. But they couldn't quite seal the deal against the Dodgers, the biggest, most mighty brand, having won 3 world championships since 2020. And first of all, credit goes to the Dodgers. They seized the opportunities when they were there. If anything, when you pay the amount of money, sometimes you're paying for guys that can just do a little bit more here and there on the margins, and ultimately that's enough to win a championship. And Andrew Friedman, their GM, and Dave Roberts, their manager, deserve credit for that. But the Jays missing out on it was a missed Cinderella opportunity. And then Sunday was a bigger example. I know we can poo-poo the idea here of our bets not getting home. Connor Zilic for not wrecking his friend and roommate, Jesse Love, which I still think he should have been more aggressive. Not saying wreck him, but more aggressive in the Xfinity race. But it's the Xfinity series, and they're 2 young guys, and they both will have opportunities to win championships going down the road. Future is very bright for them. When it comes to the NASCAR Cup Series, William Byron missed out on a chance. Yes, our ticket, 28-1 of Chase Briscoe to win the championship, never got home. And honestly, it was lucky. We were lucky he was even remotely in the ballpark at certain junctures of that race, given flat tires, wrecks, setup issues, flat tires in practice, race issues. I mean, it was a litany of things that they were just a miracle to get to that point. But Denny Hamlin was the driver that had the best car all day. He was leading by over 2 seconds with just over 2 laps to go when the caution comes out for, I will say this, a legitimate cut tire from William Byron. And this is what you're in the spot if you're NASCAR. You're trying to find ways to make your racing as entertaining as possible. But Denny Hamlin was asked afterwards what it was like to have the lead, to have by far been the dominant driver throughout the day, and yet it ends in heartbreaking fashion because of a caution through no fault of Liberty University driver William Byron's. But through no fault of his own, Byron has the cut tire and brings out the caution, and then Denny Hamlin loses the race and brings on the heartbreak where you could kind of feel this.
I don't know. I really don't have much for emotion right now. Just numb about it because just in shock. That's about it.
You know, it's amazing because I don't know if you watched the end of that race. I listened to get my usher on to a good chunk of that race from our friends Alex Hayden, Steve Post, and the crew at the Motor Racing Network. And as the race wound down, I turned it on because I wanted to see what the emotion was going to be like, whether Denny Hamlin won the race or not. And when the caution comes out, Denny Hamlin starts in the back of the pack, and it becomes obvious as they take the white flag that it was going to take a blown tire, something fluky for Kyle Larson to not let's be real here, backdoor his way into a championship. For the race, he had the best points throughout the season. He's a legitimate NASCAR champion. But for that particular race, under that particular format, William Byron backdoored his way in to that championship. Denny Hamlin had the better car throughout the day, fair and square. Late race caution changes. Kyle Larson, Cliff Daniels, and the crew do a 2-tire pit stop. The Joe Gibbs drivers elect a 4-tire pit stop. Obviously, Byron is out of it. It doesn't matter what he does on pit road because of the cut tire. It was down to 3 championship drivers. And like has been the case before, a lot of credit goes to them. But the story, it felt like, at least from my observations, was the Denny Hamlin story by far. And was brought up the idea of not only do you want a one race determining the championship, would you like to have seen it decided under something other than a green, white checkered finish because of a legitimate late race caution?
Golly, in this moment, I never want to race a car ever again. I mean, my fun meter's pegged.
It felt like that. I mean, it felt that way watching it. But the reality is, TJ, Hollywood moments do happen in sports. The Cubs winning the World Series, to one of the greatest in sports history, the Philadelphia Eagles finally winning their first Super Bowl championship.
3-1 comeback, Cavaliers of Golden State Warriors.
That's one that's in the hearts of our very own Trey Wilkerson, because it was
not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4.
Actually, it was just number 3 in terms of championships, and it did stop at 4 for your guy, LeBron James. You're a Lakers fan, aren't you, TJ?
Yes, I am.
So we will peg him as your guy and Trey's guy. Not mine. Greatest basketball player of all time is Michael Jordan, not number 2, LeBron James. You say that like a good Carolina native, by the way.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd say it's a tie between Michael Jordan and LeBron. No, it's a tie. It's a tie.
Oh, that pains me.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, we're not going down that road today. We are not in embrace debate here in the Fast.
Why did Joe Gibbs' crew, and riddle me this, why did Joe Gibbs' crew choose to do 4 tires when everybody in the race was doing 2?
That's a great question. I don't honestly have the answer to that, other than I would venture to say it was something in their analytics that they believed most teams would take 4 tires, and therefore that was the route they wanted to go, to have 4 fresh tires. I think they underestimated the fact that you were going to have a number of drivers who only took 2 tires, which was the majority call. And I would say this, the other fallacy was, it's not just racing William Byron for a championship, but there are a lot of teams that wanted to get a win in this race to have it as momentum heading into next year. Because, of course, the 3 races before this one had all been won by drivers who were competing for a NASCAR championship. William Byron won his way in at Martinsville. Chase Briscoe and Denny Hamlin were the other drivers who had won. So everybody else was looking for some kind of momentum to use from the race at Phoenix to build heading into next year when the car is likely to be the same in NASCAR. And Ryan Blaney, of course, was in that category. But when you're talking about other teams and drivers, they got nothing to lose in a championship. No. They're just going to roll the dice and see if the strategy of 2 tires was going to keep them out on the track, and therefore track position in a short race where tire wear was a factor. It was at Phoenix, but not to the degree it is at places like Darlington, Rockingham, or even Martinsville or others where it wore more ardently earlier in the year. Because of that, I just think it was a flat miscalculation from the analytics department and the teams at Joe Gibbs, because Hamlin and Briscoe were the only 2 that took 4 tires at the end of that race. But TJ, bigger point is, as much as it stings for Virginians to see the Virginia driver not win the NASCAR championship, I know for many Liberty fans, they've adopted William Byron, who is not a Virginia native, because he's a Liberty University student, or was, or whatever the case may be. I mean, he can afford to take his time, obviously, with his focus on a very successful NASCAR and lucrative NASCAR Cup Series career. But NASCAR as a whole was captivated by the Denny Hamlin chase. And sometimes that is the reality of sports. The Cubs championship in 2016, or the Red Sox championship in 2004. We're talking the first one. Philadelphia Eagles. I'm not talking about the one where they knocked off the Chiefs this past year. I'm talking about the first one. When you've never won one, and everybody's wondering, is this the moment where you finally get to experience it? I am not that degenerative, mean-spirited sports media person of, I don't want to see it because we need to give them something to keep longing for and keep hoping for.
Yeah.
Outside of my apocalyptic scenario where the rapture is going to happen at the 2-minute warning of the Super Bowl, if it's the Bills versus the Lions, because God's going to be like, nope, nobody's winning this thing. That's where the world is. Outside of that scenario, I would be delighted to see either one of them. I would love to see them win a championship. And if they faced each other, granted, I'm an Eagles fan and would love for them to win the championship. More on that Fast 5 at 5-ish NFL trade deadline updates. A lot of teams active over the day.
Yeah.
Including your Dallas Cowboys.
Very active.
But I am of that camp. But if everyone had that, if there wasn't UMBC, Virginia's run would not have been sweeter. You don't know it in the moment of UMBC.
No.
Or in the Elite Eight loss to Syracuse before that, where you coughed up a 20-point lead with 8 minutes to go. It wouldn't have been sweeter. But part of what makes those Hollywood moments great, first of all, it doesn't always happen. Sometimes there are the Buffalo Bills.
Dan Marino.
That are out there. Dan Marino is a great example of it. Mark Martin is another one where people love them, but you don't ever get to experience the ecstasy, sports sense, not drug sense, of finally getting over the hump in that regard. And you're not guaranteed to have that. The Bills, the Lions, the Browns, franchises like that are still longing for that moment.
Hornets.
The Hornets are in that category. There's so many of them where that's the case. And what makes it sweeter when they do break through and when you do get that type of, quote, Hollywood moment, end quote. But not everybody's going to get. I'm going to tennis nerd out for you for a second. Sometimes it's just heartbreak. Ons Jabeur is a great tennis player, but she yacked away a lead in the Wimbledon final to Elena Rybakina. She had the first set won, looked like she was going to win, and then Rybakina found another gear. Only time that Rybakina has ever been able to do that. Plenty of issues with Rybakina's coaching. That's a whole nother tangent, but it's part of it. And then the next year, Marketa Vondrousova, nobody even remembers that woman won the Wimbledon final because everyone was just fixated on the loser, Ons Jabeur, who once again was in multiple positions to win the championship and could not get a grand slam. And she's not come close since then. And tennis is different. I get it. Kind of like golf, where the mental toll is on you and you alone. You don't at least get to share the burden with someone else. NASCAR, it's largely on the driver, but there is an element of you at least have a pit crew and a crew chief with whom you can share that burden at times. But those people have evolved over Denny Hamlin's career. He's the Lone Ranger in that 11 operation that's been there from the beginning. Pit crew members get cycled out regularly because it's a very athletic, skill-based position. And just over time, your athletic skills for split seconds, which pit crews are, diminish and they replace you with somebody else. And then the other element of that is the crew chief. You want to hear different voices, you have to change it up. So all of that to say, part of the captivation of Denny Hamlin is I'd love to see him win a championship. I do think this was his best opportunity. Never say never. But also the thing that makes it so real is the age part. And, it does hit you in NASCAR. Harvick, Johnson, those drivers get to the 44, 45, and Hamlin's 43. That age really hits like a ton of bricks. And all of a sudden, the entire perspective changes on what you're capable of. And usually once Father Time gets you, you're not going to be able to get it back. Tom Brady won a championship with the Buccaneers, but his last 2 years, he was good, but you could tell there was just a smidge that went away. Yeah. Not a lot, but enough. And in professional sports, those little margins mean an absolute ton. It's a total difference maker. Tennis is going through that now. Novak Djokovic, to me, the best men's singles player of all time. I don't think it's even debatable, certainly from the Federer crowd, but I would even say he's better than Nadal, although Nadal is the greatest on clay by far. But Novak is not what he once was. And he's never going to get back to that. He's never going to get to the Sinner Alcaraz level if those two are playing at their best. But he's won a bunch, so you don't feel bad for him. But that's how quickly age can catch up to you in sports. 2 years ago, Djokovic wins the U.S. Open. He looks on the top of his game. He won 3 or 4 Grand Slam titles that year. Since then, he's frankly not been close in most of these matchups. He's been totally outclassed when facing Sinner and Alcaraz. And outside of one upset of Alcaraz at the Australian Open, it's repeatedly that way. I use that example to say, in individual sports in particular, where it's largely on you, tennis is that example. Yeah. Tiger Woods in golf, everyone longing for him.
Yeah.
Denny Hamlin is another example of this. You can be on the top of your game in one moment, but when it goes quickly, and it goes quickly, not relative to you and me, your average athletes that are out there.
Yeah.
It's relative to the elites of the elites, where the fine margins, those little fractions of strength, speed, agility, timing, of performance, that makes such a world of difference. And that's what makes it so captivating. When we return to the Fast Lane, NFL trade deadline recap, couple of other updates, a quick edition of the Fast Five at 5-ish leading in to Virginia Tech women's basketball. Okay, never mind. Well, we have a technical snafu that's popped up, so we're going to go commercial free for this edition of the Fast Lane, and eventually it will get sorted out. In the meantime, yes, we promised you, so why not go ahead and deliver a quick edition of the Fast Five at 5-ish.
It's time for Fast Five at 5-ish. 5-ish minutes on 5 relevant topics done around 5 p.m.-ish. Ish, because our counting skills are kinda ish. Let's start with number 5.
Wow, what a whopper of a day for the NFL trade deadline. Among the trades that have happened, if you've been hiding under a rock the last couple of days, it started Monday morning with Jalen Phillips going from Miami to Philadelphia for a third-round pick. Eagles have also added a couple of cornerbacks. I don't think they'll be overly impactful. Maybe Michael Carter from Duke will, but I have my major doubts about Jair Alexander. Big in name, not big in performance. With the Packers and Ravens, if two very well-run franchises like that are getting rid of a guy, it's more like a roll of the dice from Philadelphia. But the Phillips one, I think if he stays healthy, really can be a complementary piece to what might be a better defensive line. But the other ones that jumped out, a number of them actually, going. A.D. Mitchell goes with a couple of first-round picks to the New York Jets in exchange for Sauce Gardner. I'm a little skeptical. I'd rather spend that capital on defensive linemen than cornerbacks. To me, Sauce is boom or bust. Early in his career, and when healthy, he's been fantastic. But there have been questions the last couple of years, and I still believe Sauce Gardner is a top 5 cornerback in the NFL. But from the number 1 undisputed perch, Darius Stingley of the Texans might have something to say about that. Quinyon Mitchell in Philly might as well. I think it slipped a smidge, relatively speaking, which is why it feels like a steep price for the Colts, though I do get it, because it feels like they are trying to go with a win-now mentality. Meanwhile, other trades also involving the Jets. A.D. Mitchell, we mentioned going back to the Jets, but also back to the Jets. A first-round pick, 2027, a second-round pick this upcoming draft, plus defensive end Mozzie Smith from the Dallas Cowboys in exchange for defensive lineman Quinnen Williams. I love that for the Dallas Cowboys. This is an impactful defensive tackle, and honestly, if Williams is at the peak of his game, he could be really good. He's more inconsistent. As a Philly fan, I would have loved to have gotten him and paired him with Jalen Carter, but I'm not naive to the fact that Carter's going to get a big extension this offseason. You can't be having too much money tied up, especially in that same spot, knowing what's about to come down the road in terms of bills due in Philadelphia. But Williams to Dallas, I think it's much more impactful than Logan Wilson, the linebacker from Cincinnati, who I think can be big for Dallas. But Quinnen Williams, when healthy at his best, is a top 10 caliber defensive tackle. What is your assessment as a Cowboys fan, TJ, of that?
I think it helps plug up the run game, something Dallas has been struggling with. It gives Kenny Clark help. And honestly, Logan Wilson pickup, great coverage linebacker, something Dallas needs in the middle.
Yeah. The surprising one today is probably Joe Troy and Stroinka, who got traded from Tampa Bay to Chicago just because Tampa Bay's in a good playoff position, and giving up defensive linemen is a little bit of a head scratcher there. Draymond Jones from Tennessee to Baltimore, that just feels like a Ravens move. An above-average defensive lineman, a Baltimore team that's now playing their way into playoff contention given the uneven nature of the AFC North. I'm not sold on Pittsburgh. The Bengals have their issues, and obviously Cleveland is Cleveland. And Draymond Jones just feels like a Baltimore player. Above-average defensive lineman, skilled, gets after the passer, may not be the best when it comes to measurables, but he's a really good football player for them. Other ones just worth noting, Trevor Penning to the LA Chargers from the Saints.
Replacement for Joe Alt.
I mean, the Chargers are just so banged up on the offensive line. That, by the way, little rant, which leads into, if there's one bigger, longer picture draft nerd takeaway from this trade deadline, is the draft picks were flying as well. The idea that you can draft, that people, well, they just drafted and signed a couple of linemen. Why would they add more? Let San Diego be your top example. You can never have too many offensive linemen and too many defensive linemen. Load up on as many as possible. If most of them or all of them stay healthy, fantastic. But it literally is the most violent position because it is literally hand-to-hand physical combat between 300-ish pound people and 310, or if you're going down to defensive linemen, 250-pound people. I mean, they're the biggest people fighting. Like, just use some common sense here. The odds are you're going to have some kind of injuries in these type of scenarios. Meanwhile, speaking of the National Football League,
Number 3.
What mess are we dealing with the Arizona Cardinals? Of course, you did not hear this because you were listening as part of our doubleheader of college sports action last night. We have a doubleheader, by the way, tonight, which we'll get to in just a moment. But our doubleheader last night, game 2 of that, was the Cardinals' victory against the Dallas Cowboys. And it's amazing. That's my only beef with the Cowboys going on with Quinnen Williams is they're going all in. At least with the Cowboys going all in with Quinnen Williams, that's a guy you're going to keep for a couple of seasons. I still have my doubts Dallas is going to get this thing figured out to even make the playoffs, much less make a push this year. But they have so much capital. I understand bringing Quinnen Williams in. If you just said, hey, you lost Micah Parsons, but you get Quinnen Williams and you've got some extra draft capital if you're the Cowboys, in that sense, I actually think it's not the worst thing for the Cowboys. But short term, that's one angle. The other is this. I mean, really? Oh, Joe Buck and Troy Aikman said they expect the Cardinals to stick with Jacoby Brissett. And then Jonathan Gannon, after the game, has the nerve to say, nope, Kyler Murray is going to be our starting quarterback when he's healthy again. I mean, I get it. Young Gen Zers are going to hate me for this. Go ahead. Fast Lane, Ed Lane, wherever you listen to podcasts, get in line. But to me, Kyler Murray's not the guy I want leading my franchise. The guy, when you have to put the clause in about studying because he's so fixated on video games and screen time, you have to put a screen time cap on a grown-up, and you're investing 30, 40, $50 million a year in this guy, and in a position where he is literally supposed to be the leader of your team. I mean, that's a real problem. Cut your losses. Understand that. Meanwhile, speaking of our doubleheader tonight,
Number 2.
I love seeing the story that Dick Vitale is back broadcasting tonight. Of course, you're not going to hear him because you'll be listening for game 2 of our college basketball doubleheader. Virginia Tech women's basketball takes over in about 2 minutes. Then Duke, Texas from Charlotte is the second game of that doubleheader. But, I mean, as I've aged, maybe I have an appreciation for Dick Vitale that I did not used to. But I love this with Dick Vitale that he's back. When you think college basketball and all that's right in an era where there's so much to criticize, he is still one of those pieces where you get excited for because of what he means for college hoops. Meanwhile,
Number 1.
speaking of college sports, after begging the ACC and taking them to court for a situation where they would ultimately settle to get more money based upon their TV ratings prowess, Florida State and Clemson are playing this weekend on, clap it out, y'all, the non-rated ACC network. Boy, points of pride. Hashtag points of pride. Nothing says a point of pride quite like that. That FSU and Clemson sue the ACC. They believe they're going to be getting more television money because of their brand cachet, and they're both so bad and continue their downward spiral in football productivity that they are on the non-rated ACC network. So now all that money can just go to Virginia, Duke, Louisville, and Georgia Tech, just like they envisioned. Meanwhile, there's plenty of other local news worth mentioning, including a recap of men's basketball and women's basketball that we need to get to tomorrow in the Fast Lane. But when we return, we will kick it over right now to Virginia Tech women's basketball as their season gets underway right now on the VTRN Sports app and ask that smart speaker, open VTRN Sports.